The city never slept, not in the traditional sense. Its nights were not quiet or dark, but alive with an unsettling presence, relentless symphony of electrical storms and an omnipresent static that seeped into every corner, every crack of the sprawling urban maze. I, Elias Vaughan, had become intimately familiar with this pervasive hum. It was the soundtrack of my existence, a constant companion and, at times, a maddening adversary. My studio, a cramped room perched above the lower districts, was cluttered with outdated equipment salvaged from forgotten tech bazaars and personal projects gone awry. Wires snaked across every surface, old monitors flickered with erratic life, and speakers hissed softly as they emitted the ever-present static that blanketed the city. Tonight was no different on the surface. The storms raged outside with their usual fury, lightning splintering the sky in jagged veins of white light, thunder rolling like distant godly drums. Rain battered the grimy windows, blurring the neon glow of advertisements and the outlines of endless antennae that pierced the skyline like metallic trees. Inside, I sat hunched over my console, headphones snug against my ears, eyes scanning the oscilloscopes and frequency analyzers. The city's interference was a complicated mess, a maddening jigsaw of signals and noise that I had spent years learning to navigate. Routine signal tests, as mundane as they were, offered a temporary reprieve from the monotony of the storms. I adjusted the dials, seeking clear channels amidst the chaos. The static was thick tonight, thicker than usual, almost suffocating in its density. Yet, beneath the familiar crackle, something else stirred, a faint anomaly, a whisper beneath the storm's roar. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch, a momentary quirk in the circuitry. But the subtle pattern persisted, a fragile thread woven through the noise. I leaned closer, heart quickening. The monitors flickered erratically, the green waveforms dancing with strange irregularity. Through the static, I caught the barest hint of voices, indistinct, distant, yet unmistakably human. They were fragmented, broken by interference, but there was a rhythm, an emotional cadence that drew me in. Desperation, sorrow, a trembling plea buried beneath layers of distortion. My fingers trembled as I adjusted the frequency, coaxing the signal into focus. The voices ebbed and flowed like a ghostly tide, elusive and tantalizing. I recorded the transmissions, replaying them in a loop, trying to decipher the hidden messages. The city's relentless storm outside seemed to pulse in tandem with the mysterious broadcast, as if the very weather itself was a vessel for these spectral voices. Doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. Was this some elaborate prank? A hallucination born of sleepless nights and overexposure to electromagnetic radiation? Yet the technical precision of the signal argued otherwise. This was no random interference, it was deliberate, and it was begging to be heard. I settled back, rubbing my eyes. The studio felt colder, the shadows deeper. In this city, where every corner was veiled by static and storm, the discovery felt like a crack in the fabric of reality itself. What lay beyond the veil? What realm had these voices come from? And why were they trapped beneath the endless hum? The questions were relentless, and already I knew I would not rest until I found answers. The static had always been noise to my background interference to be filtered out. But now it was a veil, a haunting curtain that concealed truths too unsettling to ignore. I glanced at the clock. Dawn was still hours away, but the city's storm showed no signs of abating. Somewhere in the unending roar, a secret was waiting to be uncovered. And I, a simple sound engineer caught in the eye of the storm, was about to plunge headfirst into the unknown. The first crackle of the anomalous frequency had broken the silence, and there was no turning back now. Outside, the relentless storm continued its ceaseless dance. Somewhere beyond the flickering neon and rain-slick streets, hidden beneath the layers of static and interference, the voices waited, and I was listening. The relentless hum of static was a constant companion in my cluttered studio, a persistent drone that blurred the edges of reality and noise. As I leaned closer to the tangle of wires and dials before me, my fingers danced over the controls with practiced precision, coaxing out the faintest threads of sound hidden beneath the city's omnipresent electrical storms. Tonight, however, the static was different, laden with faint, indecipherable voices that whispered just below the threshold of comprehension. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, heart thudding in sync with the pulsing interference. The voices were fragmented, like shards of a shattered mirror reflecting a scene I could not yet see whole. They were desperate pleas, stifled cries for help, and cryptic references to being trapped words that felt less like random data and more like a message from a place beyond our own. My breath caught as a tremor of recognition passed through me. This was no ordinary interference. Something was reaching out through the static, and I was the only one who could hear. For hours I pored over the recordings, isolating phrases, piecing together emotional undercurrents hidden in the distortion. The voices trembled with fear and longing, painting a portrait of silent suffering that clawed at the edges of my mind. Yet, with each breakthrough, a creeping unease settled in. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching my every move. I knew I needed someone else to bear this burden, someone who could help me navigate the uncertain and dangerous path ahead. Marilyn was the only person I trusted enough to share these disturbing discoveries. I found her in a dim, cramped cafe nestled in the heart of the city's battered core. Neon signs flickered outside, casting sharp, fractured shadows across her sharp features as she listened. Headphones wrapped around her head, eyes narrowed in concentration. "It sounds like a cry for help," I said, voice low and urgent. "But from where or when?" Mara's skepticism was palpable, her brow furrowing as she processed the strange sounds. "Elias, it could be anything. Interference, hallucination, even a prank. You've been pushing yourself too hard." I met her gaze, desperation threading my words. "I know what I'm hearing. These aren't random signals. There's something trapped out there, and it's calling to us." Her eyes softened, and after a long pause, she nodded. "All right, I'll help you monitor the signals. But we do this cautiously. No reckless moves." Back in my studio, the atmosphere thickened with tension. The equipment, usually my sanctuary, began to betray signs of interference. Dials spun erratically, screens flickered with static bursts, and cables vibrated with an unnatural hum. I wasn't alone in this pursuit. Something or someone was trying to stop me. The city's oppressive static wasn't just background noise. It was a barrier, a veil maintained by forces intent on keeping these voices silent. The nights grew darker, the storms more violent, yet I found myself drawn deeper into the maddening puzzle. I wandered the rain-slicked streets, earbuds feeding me the fractured pleas, the city's neon glow smeared by wet asphalt reflecting the turmoil within me. Isolation wrapped around me like a shroud, but beneath it flickered a desperate hope that through this static, a bridge might be built between worlds. Each whisper, each broken phrase, was a thread pulling me toward a truth too unsettling to ignore. But as I delved further, the line between reality and hallucination blurred, and the shadows lengthened. The question that haunted me most wasn't just what the voices were, but what price I was willing to pay to answer their call. The air in the studio was thick with static, a pervasive hum that seemed to seep into the walls themselves, saturating every inch of the cramped space where Elias Vaughn worked tirelessly. His fingers danced over the broken console, adjusting dials and filters, chasing the ethereal threads of a frequency that defied logic. The voices came and went like ghosts caught in a storm, fragments of sound that slipped through the white noise, sometimes clear, sometimes maddeningly distorted. He pressed the headphones closer, willing himself to catch every syllable, every subtle inflection buried beneath the crackling interference. "Help, trapped, don't leave us." The words were faint, fractured, yet unmistakably human. Elias's heart thudded against his ribs, a mix of excitement and unease twisting in his gut. The city outside was a tempest of flickering neon and relentless thunder, the electrical storms that had become a permanent fixture in the skyline casting erratic shadows through the studio's grimy windows. Each lightning strike seemed to pulse through the very frequency he chased, as if the storm itself was a key to unlocking the secrets hidden in the static. Sleep had become a distant memory. Elias found himself submerged in the broadcasts, his waking hours consumed by the relentless urge to decode the messages from beyond. But the deeper he tuned, the more the line between signal and hallucination blurred. Faces appeared at the edge of his vision. Whispers echoed in empty rooms. The static no longer felt like mere noise. It was alive, a living shroud that wrapped around his mind. It was on one such night, when the storm outside reached a crescendo, that Elias heard a knock at his door. The unexpected visitor was a thin, pale man, his presence unsettling yet oddly familiar. Dr. Kalon Sato, he introduced himself, voice calm but edged with urgency. "I've been following your work. The anomalies you're detecting, they're not just random interference." Sato's eyes, sharp behind round glasses, flicked to the monitors where swirling electromagnetic patterns danced like restless spirits. These signals originate from liminal space zones, where dimensions brush against each other, made unstable by the city's storms. "You're venturing into dangerous territory, Elias. The more you probe, the greater the risk to your mind and your reality." Despite the warning, Elias felt a flicker of hope. Here was someone who understood the enigma, someone who could help him navigate the fractured frequencies. They spent hours poring over data, Sato explaining the theoretical underpinnings of electromagnetic overlaps and the city's unique storm dynamics that might create a doorway between worlds. Yet, as the nights wore on, the broadcasts grew more vivid, their emotional weight pressing down on Elias like a physical force. The voices were no longer just sounds. They became memories, pleas etched into his consciousness. He found himself pacing his tiny apartment, mumbling fragments of the transmissions, unable to resist their pull. In moments of clarity, Elias questioned his own sanity. Was this a descent into madness fueled by isolation and obsession? Or was he truly on the verge of a breakthrough that could shatter the boundaries of known reality? Sato's presence was both a balm and a reminder of the precariousness of Elias's journey. The scientist's clinical detachment was tempered by hints of his own haunted past, and his ambiguous motives cast shadows over their alliance. The chapter closes as Elias sits alone, the storm raging outside, the static alive in his ears, and the fractured frequencies beckoning him deeper into the unknown. The boundary between worlds is thinning, and so too is the line between Elias's mind and the spectral broadcasts. The question now is not whether he will uncover the truth, but whether he will survive the cost. "If I lose myself," Elias whispered into the static, "maybe I can save them." And with that, the hum of the city's endless storm swallowed his words, carrying them into the fractured night. The electric hum of the city's unending storm infiltrated every corner of my small studio, a persistent static that had become as familiar as the beat of my own heart. Tonight, though, the usual background drone felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the storm itself had eyes. I sat hunched over the console, fingers twitching around dials and sliders, eyes scanning waveforms on the cracked monitor. The faint whispers, those fractured voices from the hidden frequency, had grown clearer in certain bursts. But my attention was drawn elsewhere. A flicker on the feed from the street camera outside caught the corner of my eye. There, just beyond the rain-slicked glass, a shadow lingered. The figure was indistinct, but the posture was deliberate, unblinking. I froze, pulse quickening. The storm's static buzzed louder in my ears. Every crackle seemed to echo a warning. "They're watching," I muttered to myself, the words tasting bitter. It wasn't paranoia, it was proof. The silent authority wasn't just a rumor anymore, it was real, and it was closing in. The doorbell's chime shattered the tense silence. Mara, she slipped inside, her sharp eyes immediately assessing the room, the monitors, my tense posture. "I saw him too," she whispered, voice low but urgent. "Crow, he's been tailing you for days. We need a plan, Crow." The name felt like ice on my skin. Officially, he didn't exist, but his presence was undeniably ghost in the city's surveillance network, a cold shadow moving through the static. His methods were subtle but ruthless: signal jammers, psychological pressure. The occasional unmarked van parked too long outside my studio. We moved quickly, scanning blueprints of the city, plotting routes and safe houses. Mara's experience as a tech journalist proved invaluable. She knew the underground networks, the blind spots in the city's all-seeing eye. We rigged makeshift jammers, layered our communications with encryption, and started using coded messages woven into my recordings. Yet, every step forward felt like treading deeper into a labyrinth. My studio, once a sanctuary of sound and clarity, now felt like a cage humming with unseen threats. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing through the grimy windows, casting erratic shadows. I could feel the boundary between reality and the distorted broadcasts blurring, the voices from the hidden frequency whispering warnings of their own. One night, as the city plunged into a sudden blackout, an orchestrated move by the silent authority to disrupt my equipment, I found myself darting through rain-slick alleys, heart hammering against ribs, the hum of drones slicing the air above. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating, but surrender was not an option. I was the conduit, the only link between worlds. Back at the studio, Mara's hands steadied mine as we adjusted the jammers, our breaths shallow but resolute. "We can't let them silence us," she said, eyes fierce in the flickering glow of monitors. I nodded, the weight of the storm and surveillance pressing down, but also a stubborn ember of hope kindling within. The silent authority wanted control, censorship, the erasure of what they feared. But I was determined to resist, to peel back the static veil and listen to the voices trapped beyond, even if it meant walking blind into the storm's heart. The nights grew longer, the threats closer, but with Mara by my side and the static as my guide, I edged further into the unknown. The hunt for truth had become a battle for survival, and the city's relentless storm was both adversary and ally in this fight. As the chapter closes, the flicker of static on the monitors resolves into a faint, unmistakable pulsar call from beyond, urging me onward despite the tightening noose. The storm rages on, but so does my resolve. The studio was cloaked in shadows, punctuated only by the intermittent flicker of neon bleeding through the grimy windows. Elias sat hunched over his console, fingers deftly adjusting dials and sliders, his eyes narrowed behind tired lids. The hum of the city's electrical storms was a constant companion, a low, omnipresent static that seemed less like background noise and more like an oppressive shroud suffocating the city and him. Tonight, the usual patterns of interference were disrupted. A faint whisper emerged from the tangled frequencies, a spectral voice riding the waves of static, fragile and broken. Elias's heart quickened as he isolated the signal, the voice fragmenting into cryptic syllables that seemed eerily familiar. He replayed the recording, slowing the tempo, filtering out the noise, desperate to catch a coherent phrase. Nightfall, 12th of March, East Sector, help. The date struck him like a physical blow. It was the night his younger sibling, Leanne, had vanished without a trace during one of the city's earliest storms. The memory was a jagged scar in his psyche, a wound reopened anew. Elias's breath hitched as a surge of emotion flooded him: grief, anger, hope, all tangled into a desperate need for answers. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, the room spinning slightly. The voices from the hidden broadcasts were no longer distant echoes. They were threads weaving directly into the fabric of his own fractured past. Was it coincidence, or had the static been whispering truths he had long buried? A knock at the door broke his reverie. Mara stepped inside, her sharp gaze immediately assessing the disarray. "Elias, you've been at this all night," she said, voice edged with concern. "You're chasing ghosts again." He gestured to the screen, replaying the faint voice. "Listen to this. It mentions Leanne's disappearance. This isn't just some random signal, it's connected." Mara's frown deepened as she sifted through his scattered notes and recordings. "If this is true, it changes everything. But you have to be careful. You're getting lost in this, Elias." He looked up, eyes burning with a mix of desperation and resolve. "I can't turn back now. This could be the key to understanding the storms and what happened to Leanne." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden burst of static that crackled through the speakers, a sharp, chilling plea cutting through the noise. "Help us, trapped, please." Elias flinched, the sound reverberating through his chest. The voices weren't just signals. They were cries from a realm imprisoned by the city's electrical storms, echoes of suffering that mirrored his own pain. As the storm outside intensified, lightning casting fleeting shadows across the room, Elias stood by the window, gazing out at the neon-lit streets. The city was alive with buzzing wires and electric pulses, but beneath it all lay a silent anguish that he was only beginning to comprehend. He whispered to himself, "I'll find you, Leanne, and I'll find them all." The path ahead was shrouded in static and uncertainty, but Elias's resolve was unwavering. The past was no longer just a memory. It was a beacon guiding him deeper into the heart of the storm. The night stretched on, the voices growing louder, the mystery pulling him ever closer to the edge of revelation and madness. As dawn threatened the horizon, Elias's fingers hovered over the controls, ready to dive further into the unknown. Somewhere beyond the veil, answers awaited, and he was determined to reach them, no matter the cost. The static hummed on an eerie lullaby that promised both salvation and ruin, and the city listened, silent but watching.